have a special treat for you guys today. All the way from Japan, a Nissan Skyline R34. Yes, a real Nissan Skyline. Now, longtime viewers will know that I'm not a Nissan guy. So, what the heck is the most hyped Nissan in the world doing in my garage? Well, it's getting modded, of course. This car belongs to a friend, and the more eagle-eyed viewers will note that it's not a GTR. This is a lower spec model with an RB25 Neo and an automatic transmission. Well, at least it used to be an automatic trans. But today we'll be swapping in a CD009 6-speed manual out of a 350Z transmission, which you guys may be familiar with because it gets swapped into just about everything. Now, we're jumping into the middle of this project, so the trans bell housing has already been notched for the starter and the adapter plate has already been bolted up to the engine. Now, with most trans swaps, the hard part is figuring out what parts will actually line up and fit. But once you sort that out, the installation for all transmissions is mostly the same. Here, we're prepping the 350Z clutch fork and throwout bearing, and installing it onto the input shaft of the CD009. This assembly is actually what pushes on the clutch pressure plate to disengage the clutch, and it's fairly simple in design. You just push on one end of the fork using hydraulics and a clutch pedal, and the fork pivots to push the throwout bearing into the pressure plate, thus disengaging the clutch. This is the system used by most manual transmissions, and it should work perfectly on this Skyline. Now that the trans is ready, it's time to install the flywheel and clutch kit onto the RB25. The new ARP flywheel bolts get a bit of ARP shmoo, accompanied with a little Loctite, and then the flywheel is installed. Here you can get a closer look at the adapter plate from Collins. It's a fairly simple piece that just adapts the RB engine to the CD009 bell housing. To get the flywheel torqued down properly, I'm holding the flywheel still with a pry bar, and Peter's torquing the bolts down. Once that's tightened to spec, we cleaned off any grease or oil that's on the mating surface of the flywheel before moving on to installing the clutch kit.
All that stuff.
As you can see, the clutch is sandwiched between the flywheel and the pressure plate and acts as the mechanism to connect the engine to the transmission. We got the clutch kit lined up, bolted in, and torqued to spec. And with that, the clutch setup was done. Now, I said installing the parts was easy, but getting the car to understand why it's just had a kidney removed and replaced with a different one is not quite as straightforward. The Skyline used to get its speed signal out of a sensor in the transmission, but the 350Z got its speed signal out of a sensor in the differential. That means that the new trans going in doesn't have the sensor we need to tell the Skyline's brain how fast it's going. Now, we thought of this and had a metal reluctor wheel welded onto the drive shaft, which was supposed to work in conjunction with a Hall effect sensor to get a speed signal. But as you can imagine, this went horribly wrong. This video is brought to you by our merch store. We've got 2 new t-shirts out just in time for the holidays, the Certified Pre-Owned tee and the Toyota Reliability tee. You can grab a shirt for yourself from our store, which is linked right below the like button. The Serial 9 shifter we were using uses fairly beefy mounts on the trans, mounts that get in the way of where the Hall effect sensor needs to be. Now, this isn't a catastrophic problem, but we'd like to know how fast the car is going, so we had to do a little investigation. In the meantime though, let's try and get this big old gearbox onto the car. As you can imagine, trying to fit a bigger transmission in a narrow tunnel always requires a bit of ingenuity to make it work. We fiddled around a bit trying to get the input shaft to line up, but we kept hitting the left side of the tunnel. Thankfully though, we found some ingenuity at the end of a sledgehammer, and actually found a bit on a grinder as well. How about that? Now, before the purists pounce on us in the comments section, understand that almost any trans swap will require some massaging of the trans tunnel in pretty much every car. Once we got that sorted out, we lined up the trans for another go, and there's the money shot. The input shaft on the trans slotted right into its home on the clutch kit, and our new 6-speed trans was finally mated. Next up was actually bolting it in. There are nearly a dozen bolts going around the circumference of the bell housing, with 2 on top that you have to use a million extensions to reach. This is where nice tools like our Milwaukee electric ratchet really come into their own. Then the trans mount went on to support the transmission to the chassis. Then the clutch slave cylinder. And we have clutch operation.
Yeah, we are moving.
Here's how the trans looks in its new home. Not too bad. Now, of course, we need to give that transmission somewhere to send its power, so we installed our new one-piece drive shaft. This is where we noticed that there was a sensor on the differential. So after doing up the drive shaft, we got on the Google machine and found out that this was an ABS sensor, which can totally be used to output a speed signal.
This speed conversion box. I can get speed off of an ABS sensor from the rear. So this car has 3 ABS sensors, 2 on each front wheel and then 1 on the rear differential.
Okay. With that solution in mind, all we had to do was sort out the wiring to make it work with the gauges. But we wanted to get the car started, so we moved ahead to getting the exhaust back on the car, but the mid-pipe that it came with presented a bit of a problem.
So essentially, we can see right here, exhaust leak issue, right? You can just see that when you bolt these two up, you're gonna have a massive gap there, no matter what.
Well, nothing our old friend Mr. Hammer can't solve. Along with his friend, Mr. High Temp Spooge. Now, this isn't a permanent setup, just one that will get the exhaust working until that pipe can be replaced. You can see what that leak was doing to the gasket before we took it off. Yeah, this thing's proper rooted, mate. With our Nissan certified fix done, we double checked everything. Got the shifter rod installed. And started her up. Yeah, that doesn't sound right. Turns out the mad JDM tight intercooler piping that came with this car was hitting the fan. So naturally, zip ties came to the rescue. That sounds better, I guess. Anyways, it was finally time to test our handiwork and run the Skyline through the gears. Here's first gear.
Hey.
Second gear.
Alright, second gear, good.
Third gear.
Yep.
Fourth gear.
Perfect.
Fifth gear.
Yep.
And sixth gear.
6 speeds. Excellent. And reverse.
Oh, and reverse.
Reverse. Very nice. That is a working CD009 in a R34 Skyline.
We did it! The Skyline now has a working 6-speed transmission that should be able to handle as much power as the owner would care to throw at it. But there was still plenty of wiring left to be done for the speed signal, boost controller, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But you'll have to wait for the next episode where we finish it up, get it on the ground, and take it for a proper test drive. So hit subscribe and make sure you don't miss out. And drop a comment right below the like button and tell me whether or not you prefer this R34 Skyline or one of our Supras. Me, well, you know where my loyalty lies. See you in the next one.